We've reached a point where the popular image of Dietrich Bonhoeffer has strayed far from the truth. That popular image is like a Rorschach test. The more you look at it in popular biographies or internet blogs, the more you learn. But not about Bonhoeffer. You learn about the people who make the ink blots. In this lecture, I hope to convince you that Bonhoeffer was neither a modernist secularizer nor a conservative evangelical reactionary, but simply a faithful Christian theologian. This reminds me of some journalists in the States asking the distinguished Gary Wills, a Catholic intellectual, what is it about this Pope? And Wills replied, well, he's a Christian. And what is it about this Bonhoeffer? Well, he's a theologian. A theologian, moreover, who challenges us to think about what I consider as the emerging, or the issue of the emerging Christian paradigm of the third millennium in which we live. A paradigm, I would suggest, influenced by Bonhoeffer, of the worldly God and the worldly resurrected Christ who offers new and truly human life for the world. But before we get into that, we must spend a little time examining some problems of Bonhoeffer interpretation, and the first one is reductionism. In this, Bonhoeffer is the anti-Nazi resistor who fought against Hitler in the German church struggle and then in the political conspiracy that tried to mount a coup but failed. In this one-sided portrait, Bonhoeffer the thinker disappears behind the historical actor. But Bonhoeffer the theologian is not an epiphenomenon of anti-Hitler resistance. He is not a mere byproduct of his historical context and action. Consider these facts. Beginning in 1927, he took the Kantian blinders off the eyes of Protestant theology, and he relocated God's revelation in the world, in the social realm of persons, relations, and communities, with Jesus as God's image of a new humanity. And I call this his theology of sociality. Then, beginning in 1931, came his new valuation of the Sermon on the Mount and his reconfiguring the relationship of Christian faith and obedience, which he called simply discipleship. Actually, in German, the title of the book is Nachfolge, which simply means following after Jesus. By the end of 1932, in a lecture on the topic Christ and Peace, he sketched the core ideas of his 1937 book, Discipleship. Now, all of this was accomplished by this young theologian before Hitler gained power in 1933. So certainly Bonhoeffer was an historical actor of importance. At the same time, from first to last, he was a thinker, a Christian theologian. Now, the second major problem is the politicizing of Bonhoeffer. Now, Bonhoeffer has many prominent political admirers. Tony Blair, for example, called Bonhoeffer his favorite German. Gordon Brown, in his book on courage, contains an admiring chapter about Bonhoeffer. And then, of course, there was Kevin Rudd's anniversary article published in the Monthly about a decade ago. And perhaps this is the best informed Bonhoeffer article by a politician. Rudd actually visited the Bonhoeffer sites in Berlin and the Bonhoeffer archive at Union Seminary in New York. But by politicizing, I do not mean admiration of politicians. I rather mean those who co-opt Bonhoeffer, who pick out quotes, or, if that's not satisfactory, who manufacture quotes, or even write whole biographies to claim Bonhoeffer's support for their views in politics and the culture wars. Such a one was President George W. Bush, who attempted to justify his preemptive war in Iraq using a Bonhoeffer quote about how God can bring good out of evil. A similar effort was made by the political science professor, the late Jean Bethke Elshtain. An extreme example of self-justifying co-option was the militant US anti-abortion group called Missionaries to the Unborn. They invoked Bonhoeffer to justify a vigilante who had murdered a doctor who performed abortions. Less extreme, but vastly more widespread in the United States, is the politicizing of Bonhoeffer by right-wing evangelicals. Not all evangelicals, mind you, but a great many, especially on the political right wing. And to explain this right-wing evangelical affection, consider the Bonhoeffer biography by Eric Metaxas. Anyone here read this biography? Right. I imagine a number of you have. A New York Times bestseller. It's sold 1 million copies. The author has given just about that many interviews and talks across the United States. Even, I heard, adding a few to his total by a week here in Australia last April. A guest of an outfit called the Australian Christian Lobby. And what's the takeaway, as they say, from these volume sales and talks which have saturated American conservatives in the evangelical market? What is the Bonhoeffer that Metaxas preaches? Well, it boils down to this. Just as Dietrich Bonhoeffer was, like Eric Metaxas himself, by the way, a born-again Christian who courageously resisted Hitler to the point of death, so today, Christians in America should resist the tyrannical impulses of the Obama government, which is destroying the American Republic through its healthcare policies and its acceptance of gay marriage. The Huffington Post hit the nail on the head. Its headline read, "Conservative pundit compares birth control mandate to rise of Nazi Germany." When the US Supreme Court ruled that gay marriage did not violate the US Constitution, a group of leading evangelical conservatives, inspired and supported by Metaxas, announced that a Bonhoeffer moment had arrived. You can imagine people thinking what it would be like to be in a conspiracy going after Hitler. They pledged to resist by civil disobedience. And the culmination of the whole crusade arrived last June when Eric Metaxas declared that we, that is, Christians like himself, must vote for Donald Trump because he is the last best hope of keeping America from sliding into oblivion. So there you have it in its naked truth. Bonhoeffer reduced to a pawn in the American culture wars by Eric Metaxas, the high priest of right-wing evangelical Bonhoeffer misinterpretation. What we see in this blatant political co-opting of Bonhoeffer is an extreme version of an old problem, namely reading Bonhoeffer partially and as partisans, reading the parts of Bonhoeffer that people think reinforce what they already believe, and avoiding the parts that are foreign and challenging. And here's how it came about. During his lifetime, Bonhoeffer was known as the author of his book about Christian discipleship, published in Germany, 1937. 3 years after his death, it appeared in English in 1948, called, with a bit of a Cecil B. DeMille twist in its title, The Cost of Discipleship. It became the favorite of evangelicals because it was biblical, an interpretation of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, and the letters of St. Paul. Also, because it called for uncompromising personal Christian faith and a life based on following Jesus. 5 years later, another book by Bonhoeffer appeared called Letters and Papers from Prison, written while he was being interrogated in a Berlin military jail. Now people heard that Bonhoeffer was saying the world has come of age, that the age of religion is over, that we need a worldly, religionless Christianity. Some people were so shocked by these ideas that they thought Bonhoeffer's experience in prison must have addled his brain. By the 1960s, these phrases were turned into slogans in the US. Books appeared with titles like The Secular Meaning of the Gospel, The Secular City, Honest to God, and so forth. For a few years, Bonhoeffer's name was invoked by some so-called death of God theologians, who must have been, at least for a little while, important people because they were on the front page of Time magazine. Now, these two books, Discipleship and Letters and Papers from Prison, read as though they were conservative and liberal, respectively, or evangelical and modernist, if you will. They are poles around which two camps have gathered. Metaxas did not invent this polarity. He just metaxasized it. He recruited Bonhoeffer to his own tribe in the culture wars. So if Metaxas focuses mainly on sexual issues, contraception, abortion, stem cell research, gay marriage, others try to play off Bonhoeffer the conspirator against Bonhoeffer the pacifist. For example, using him to justify the Iraq War. Now, I want to show you tonight that Bonhoeffer was neither a conservative evangelical nor a liberal secular modernist. He was both thoroughly modern and also thoroughly Christian. He was completely at home in the scientific and intellectual life of modernity. His father and eldest brother were both, after all, scientists. But he was a Christian who had a lover's quarrel with modernity. He was not a conservative evangelical, nor a liberal modernist. He is a Lutheran theologian of a new kind of Christianity. His question was, who is Christ for us today? What is authentic Christianity for us today, really?